Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a podcast using the free open source software called Audacity. First off, you need to download the program. I just went to Google and typed in Audacity, and the first result is the Audacity software website. So I'm going to click on that website, and you'll notice here that you can have a download button, and Audacity works on Windows, Apple, and Linux machines. You just click on the link and it'll automatically start to download, and it will also automatically know which version of the software to download to your machine. When you open up Audacity for the first time, it will look like this here. You'll notice at the top of the page are navigation tools. They look similar to other sound tools that you might have used in the past. You have your pause button, your play button, and stop button, your skip to the beginning and skip to the end buttons, your record button. Also, we have these tools here, the most important being our selection tool. That's what we're going to be using to help us navigate our sound recording. You also want to make sure you have your microphone selected. You can either use an external microphone, a headset microphone that you might use with video games, or your computer onboard microphone. Just note that an external microphone will probably sound better, have better sound quality. And also make sure that it's connected. You might do a test record before you do your final recording. And it's always good to test recordings also. In this example, I'm going to read a script for a podcast and that I wrote. Oftentimes when you do your own podcast, you might not want to read a script. But in this case, we're going to do a episode 0, like an introductory podcast. It's going to be really short, just maybe 10 or 15 seconds long, just talking about giving the podcast its name and also talking about what the purpose of the podcast is. And then we're going to do a couple of editing. We're going to use some editing tools in Audacity. So let's record our audio. I'm going to click our record button. And it's okay to give it a few seconds. Take your time. Take a deep breath before you start to read your podcast text. So here we go. Welcome to episode 0 of Trailblazing, a podcast where we will share the latest news about events being held around campus. So expect the first episode to be released on this feed in a few days. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember to keep trailblazing. Okay, so now we're going to click stop. So we have a little bit of editing to do, and that's why we're going to use our selection tool. We're going to go back to the first of our sound recording, and we're going to just put our sound recording. We're going to select this area right here with our selection tool. So this is what we're going to be focusing in on, and I'm going to press play. And it's okay to give it a few seconds. Take your time. Take a deep breath. So all of this here was just recording that we made that wasn't going to be a part of the final show. So I'm just going to get rid of this information here. I have it already selected. I'm going to hit my right mouse button and click cut. We can also type Control X if we wanted to. Now all that information is gone. Now when we go to the first of our podcast, this is what we're going to hear. Welcome to episode 0 of Trailblazing. So that's the beginning of our podcast. And I also noticed at the end of our podcast, I said some few things that I don't want to be heard in our regular podcast. So I'm going to go. Let's start there. We're going to start at second 12 of our current recording. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember to keep trailblazing. Okay. So I noticed that we might have some errors here that I might want to clean up. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember to keep trailblazing. Okay, this pause, the podcast, and we might want to get rid of also. And again, I just highlighted this pause. I'm going to hit my right mouse button, click cut, and let's start here again. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember to keep trailblazing. Alrighty. So that's the end of our podcast. It's okay to leave a few seconds of blank space there, but I'm just going to get rid of this area here. This is going to be stuff that I don't want. It's not going to be a part of the podcast. So again, I selected it and I click cut. So now we have a pretty good sound recording for the text that we're going to use for our podcast. Our next step would be to use some introductory music, theme music, if you will. Now you want to be careful. You want to use what's called royalty-free music. And I found a website that has some royalty-free music called Pixabay. There are several places you can go online. If you just search, there's podcast.co, but there's several places that you can go to find music, and you can click what type of music, what type of mood you wanted to set with your podcast. So in this podcast, I just used this track called Stomp, and I just clicked download, and I downloaded the MP3 for this track. Now I can go to File and import a new track. Click Audio. Download. And here we have clapping. This is the name of the track. I'm going to click Open. So here's my track here. I can also drag and drop. I'm just going to move my sound recording down the timeline. This is called a timeline here. And this is my complete song. Let's listen to the song now. Okay, that's the song. The reason why you want to drag this down is because if we have them on the same timeline, this is what will happen. Welcome to episode 0 of Trailblazing, a podcast. Now that's not bad because this can be a bed throughout the entire spoken word section. But what I would like to do for our podcast is we're going to get rid of a portion of this. Let's get rid of all of this. And have this be our theme music. And we're going to use a effects tool. You can see here there's many different types of effects. We're just going to use 2 at the moment for this example. We're going to use fade in and fade out to make our podcast seem a little bit more professionally produced. So I'm going to click fade in. Oh, we've got to select something first. So I'm going to start for the very beginning of my theme music. And I'm going to go up here to Effect. And I'm going to click Fade In. So you notice how the wave shrunk. So I'm fading in as it's getting louder and louder. I can go back and do that one more time. It'll go make it even a more pronounced fade in. You also notice here that I do have a little bit of overlap. So what I want to do is I want to take this section. I'm going to select this section, and I want my effect to be fade out. So see how it goes a little bit quieter? I want to do that one more time. Fade out. So now let's listen to what this sounds like. Here we go. Welcome to episode 0 of Trailblazing, a pod. So that allows us to have a fade in effect, and then we have a fade out effect. So we only have a little bit of overlap. And now we want to do, that's our intro theme. We want to do our outro theme. We can pick another song if you'd like, or we can just use the same theme music. And that's what I'm going to do. We're going to use the same theme music. I'm going to click the entire track. So I have the entire track selected, and I'm just going to click copy. And then I'm going to go over here in a blank spot, hit my right mouse button. I might not be able to do it with my mouse button. So I'm going to click Control V on my keyboard. And you see here it copied what I pasted. I'm just going to drag this to the end of our podcast. And with our selection tool, I'm going to set it right here. And we're going to listen to our outro now. The podcast, and remember to keep trailblazing. So as you can see, we created a audio track here, and then we created what we could call an intro and outro theme track. And it's following this timeline, and the overall timeline of our podcast now is around 30 seconds. So we have we used effects to do a fade in and a fade out, so that we have a little bit of overlap of our music, of our voice track, and we have a little bit of overlap of our outro track. So this is the way we can do our podcast. Now, once you have your podcast recorded and you've done your production work, you can go up here to File and Save Project. Click that. Save Project is for Audacity project, not an audio file. For an audio file, you'll have to open another app and use export. So what that's telling us is when we save this, we're saving a raw file that can be edited. And that's what we want, at least at first. So we're going to click OK, and we're going to name our podcast file Trailblazing 0 Project. And it's notice here that the save type is AUP3 project file, or AUP3. Click Save. This can be edited, so we can come back later, add new files, we can delete files, do whatever we want, totally change this up. But it's not something that you're going to be able to turn into your professor. Once you're finished making your podcast, producing your podcast, you want to go up to the file one last time and click Export. And you notice here we have several options. Export to MP3, WAV, OGG, many different types of styles. Export to as MP3 will probably be the most commonly accessible version because it can play on most computers. So let's click on Export as MP3. Notice here we have the MP3 file and we have our Trailblazing 0 project. Let's click Save. Your tracks will be mixed down and exported as one stereo file. So they're going to take both of our tracks and they're going to make it into one file. MP3 also compresses the sound file. That shouldn't be too much of a problem for a spoken word file. Let's click OK. You can create some metadata here. We're just going to use our normal file type, file name. So let's click OK. So it should have saved. It should have saved in downloads. Okay, so that's where it's going to be saved at. We're going to go to, I'm going to open up our folder to downloads. And let's see if we can find our project. Yeah, this is here. Here it is right here. Trailblazing 0 project. We can rename it or whatever we need to do. But let's click it and open up in Windows Media Player. Well, I guess we're going to open up into what's called Groove Music. Welcome to episode 0 of Trailblazing, a podcast where we will share the latest news about events being held around campus. So expect the first episode to be released on this feed in a few days. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember to keep trailblazing. So that's our podcast that we just created. We took it from just a raw recording of me reading this audio track, this vocal track. We went to a website, Pixabay.com. We downloaded a royalty-free audio track, which that means that we don't have to pay money for the audio track. We can use it without being infringing on people's copyright. It's meant to be used in this way. And We made an intro and outro by using the effects tool and fade in and fade out. And we did a little bit of overlapping just to give it a kind of a professional polish. And then we went up to File and we saved our project so we can edit later. And once we are satisfied with what we have done, then we can go down to export as an MP3 file. So that's what we did and how we used Audacity to create this podcast. I hope you have a wonderful day and have a great time creating your own podcast in this class